Greetings, fellow smart people. This is the Brain Software Podcast, episode 159, and today we have a special treat. I say that because we have a guest who is not only a medical doctor, but he's transformed his own life in a dramatic way, and, like us, he can exclaim, "These are days of victory!"
That's right, Mike. We rarely bring on guests to this podcast, and there has to be a really good reason when we do. Dr. Kalayjian is a medical doctor who specializes in weight loss, and he has his own incredible journey to tell you all about how he got to where he is, and we're going to let him tell that story in a moment. This podcast episode is really all about the intersection of human nutrition with hypnosis and beliefs. If it makes no sense to you right now, it will in a few minutes. So here he is, ladies and gentlemen. Let's bring him out. He's lost 150 pounds and he hasn't gone looking for it again. He's a really nice guy despite his social media tirades, and he may not know it yet, but he's already a hypnotist. Here he is, the man you want in your corner for weight loss and wellness, Dr. Kalayjian.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, guys. It's awesome interacting on social media. It's great to finally meet you in person, both of you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it was such our pleasure. I've been looking forward to this for such a long time, and I know Mike has too. We are big fans. We want to start off by just mentioning that we're huge fans of the Lowcarb MD podcast. Anybody listening, our audience tends to be people interested in personal development, hypnosis, neurolinguistic programming, NLP. Basically, people who are smart and like to build a better lives for themselves. You've got to be listening to Tro and Brian on the Low Carb MD podcast. So I'll say that right out of the gate. And let's dive straight in. Mike, do you want to get the ball rolling and talk about how hypnosis and beliefs fit in with wellness and why we wanted Tro on this podcast?
Well, what amazes me is how something can be in the zeitgeist for a very, very long time and never be questioned. And it takes on a life of its own. And that's certainly what we've seen with healthy whole grains. Eggs will kill you. Salt is bad for you. Meat will give you a heart attack. And Chris knows in my own case, I'm 67. My dad died at 57. My mom at 53, cancer and heart disease. And I ate the typical North American diet, blew up to, which for me was a lot, 190 pounds. I went to my doctor, great medical doctor. He recommended cut down eggs, cut down meat, don't eat any dairy. Have lots of fruits and vegetables and healthy whole grains. Don't drink any more wine. And I did the opposite. I started reading Mark Sisson and a bunch of other people, talking to this genius here. And I ate tons of meat, tons of eggs, big blocks of cheese. And he was worried because I had a fatty liver. And ultrasound confirmed it. And after eating like this for some time, I went back to him. I was down to the low 160s. And he phoned me. When the doctor phones instead of his secretary, it's always bad news. And he said, "Mike, your blood markers are perfect. What did you do?" And I said, "The exact opposite of everything you told me to do." This fascinated me. It got me excited. I have so much energy now and still teach martial arts. And Chris and I are all about this, about doing what works. And it astounds me that it is still in the zeitgeist that we have to count calories, something that mankind never did. And the whole idea of calories in, calories out, all fats are bad for you. And it appears that there is some sort of motion that you'd probably comment on better than me to reverse this now. People are starting to catch on with paleo and keto eating and so on, carnivore eating, but it is so deeply embedded that we find people actually get angry when you attempt to talk to them about this. So that's the hypnotic effect. Society has essentially taken on the Ansel Keys trance and is living it still.
It's definitely mass hypnosis and propaganda on many levels. I mean, look, I don't want to sound like a tinfoil hat wearing guy, but just look at the money and you'll understand.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. If you look at the money, you'll understand. When you look at academic and nutritional research, over $300 million has been donated by industry. Okay. Meaning Coca-Cola, Nestle, Mars, Frito-Lay, Doritos, right? So what's happened is who's benefited? Right? Yeah, I think that's the best way to look at it. Who benefits from telling you to eat multiple small meals? Okay. One, and to eat healthy whole grains and to eat that way. The people that benefit are the diabetes companies, okay, all the diabetic medication companies, because they're going to end up selling you diabetes medications, okay. The weight loss medications companies, so pharmaceutical industry probably benefits from that message. The other people that benefit is the food industry, okay. And look, some people don't blame them, right? Hershey's and Nestle, and they were tasked to make a profit and to sell us amazing food, and that's what they've done. That's their goal, right? Their goal isn't your metabolic health. Somehow, they've ended up, Kellogg's and Quaker have donated so much money to the dietetics organizations, medical organizations, diabetes organizations, that nobody has questioned anything that's been against that message. They're the same companies who are investing money into research wings at hospitals and at universities that are doing the primary research. And we know that whoever pays for that research, 85% of the time, it will produce research in favor of whoever paid for it. So the system of education, right, is geared towards maintaining that status quo, and anything that question, and everybody benefits. The pharmaceutical company benefits, right? The food companies benefit. The doctors benefit from bringing you back and blaming you. They don't have to take responsibility, right, for their bad advice, when they can tell you it's your fault that you're not eating less calories. Mm-hmm. So what happens is, and they get the benefit when they bring you back to, to take your blood pressure medications and have more visits with them. And, they benefit by looping you into their system, right? So there's the people who don't benefit are the average person, right? And I know this sounds like really kind of conspiratorial, but look, I was a 350-pound doctor, okay? I was 350 pounds, and I'm board certified in internal medicine, 90th, above the 90th percentile on my board exam. I know the evidence better than 90% of doctors that are practicing. Okay, their evidence, right?
Right.
And when my wife was like, "You're a smart guy, go figure this out," you can figure out obesity. Like,
at the time, you weighed what,
350 pounds?
Okay.
Yeah. What I did was what any good doctor would do. I went back to the evidence, and the reality is that this whole eat more whole grains, eat more fruits and vegetables, eat more frequently, eat immediately upon waking, eat breakfast, right? This message is falsified in the literature in plain sight.
Yeah.
Okay. If you go to the literature and look up all the trials, low carb, and that's what I did. What would you do? Like, if this was pneumonia, if I had pneumonia and I didn't have obesity, right? What would I do? I would go to literature. I'd see, okay, which antibiotic head to head would do better, right? So I went to the literature and I went to go see, all right, which diets do better, low carb versus low fat, eating more often versus eating less often, right? Who does better? Well, it just so happened that there was always a slight advantage to low carb. It wasn't a huge advantage, but it was a slight advantage. Okay,
yeah,
so
and the studies are a bit difficult to rely on 100% of the time, much of the time, just because of the nature of reporting, the nature of how long they go on, and all kinds of complications, right?
Yeah, look, and when you're interpreting the scientific data, there's always issues, limitations that you have to take into account. But when 50 trials are supporting a low carb diet, it just makes you ask a question. When they compare, in the A to Z trial or Diet Fits and all these big trials where they compare one diet to the other, when Atkins is consistently doing better, you start asking, well, what's going on here? Yeah. So when I started my weight loss journey, I was like, okay, you know what? I know there's all these limitations. I know, but when it comes down to it, head to head, how do I lose more weight? It's low carb. I don't care what the reason is. That's how I started. I don't care what the reason is. The data says if you do low carb, you're going to lose 5 pounds more. Great. I want that one.
Yeah.
Right. And then it went down into this rabbit hole of, wait a second, even calorie for calorie, if you do low carb, you reverse metabolic syndrome. Calorie for calorie, you reduce fatty liver. Okay. And then you go down this deeper rabbit hole of, the implications of fructose on overall health, the mental health aspects of diet, okay, cannot be understated.
Yeah, those are huge.
The mental. So you go, as you progress through the medical literature, now, by that time, so this was like 6 years ago, I had read 1,000 primary research articles, right? I had read 300 books, 3 obesity medicine textbooks. And I'm like, holy crap, it's like somebody just showed me how to view the matrix, right? I mean, that's how, like, we were told something that was completely a lie. And underneath it all is a set of rules and data about appetite, satiety, and hunger that have nothing to do with what they told us.
That's really interesting because I remember in your podcast, you were talking about how it's easier for an MD to simply say, eat more grains, do this, and just sort of parrot the party line. And even though they may know that's not accurate, in my own case, when my cholesterol was elevated, the doctor said, cut down the meats, the eggs, all these things. And I said, but isn't it true that there's no proven connection between dietary cholesterol and serum cholesterol? And he said, yes. And I said, then why are you telling me to do it? He said, it's what we are taught to say.
Yeah. Yeah. That's talk about propaganda and mass hypnosis, right? I mean, we're propaganda and mass hypnosis. If you're obese and your cholesterol is high, it's usually related to being overfed. And if you have fatty liver, right, it's usually related to being overfed. And here's the problem. Okay. What do you think fasting does to cholesterol? Right?
I would imagine it elevates it.
Right. It elevates. Not eating elevates your cholesterol. If you look at anorexia, if you look at fasting, and particularly if you stratify the data on fasting and overall weight, meaning like the leaner you get and you fast, the higher your cholesterol goes.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, right? Because if you put yourself into a fasting situation, which for the listeners out there who aren't familiar with the terminology, we're talking about just not eating for a certain period of time, whatever it is, whether it be a intermittent,
by choice.
Yeah, by choice. Intermittent fasting, let's say you take 18 hours off out of every 24-hour cycle, or if you go on a 2 or 3 day or whatever, you can talk more about this, fast. Obviously, if you're not eating, your body is going to need to release energy that has been stored, and that's going to elevate cholesterol, which is really just a molecule held inside of a boat, which is an LDL or HDL particle, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, just to make it really simple, when you're fasting or when you're going low carb, you're asking your body to use fat for fuel. Mm-hmm. Okay, if you're really big, you got a lot of fat that can go into the bloodstream, and you don't really need to upregulate cholesterol to mobilize this fat, to send it to every tissue, right? And let's say you get really lean. You guys look really lean, okay? And now you are still not eating carbohydrates and you're still fasting. You are asking your body to do a harder task, right? It has to mobilize fat for fuel. Every muscle, every tissue in your body needs that fat for fuel. How does it do it, right? It needs to upregulate cholesterol so it can mobilize your fat for fuel.
So that's probably one of the biggest fallacies that doctors are taught and still promote to their patients every single day, is that we're going to take a blood sample, we're going to measure your cholesterol, and at worst, maybe just look at so-called total cholesterol. In some cases, maybe they'll use the LDL cholesterol number, which is calculated, not even directly measured in most cases, from my understanding. And then they'll trust some suggestion that if it's higher than this number, which that number over the course of years has been creeping lower,
creeping down,
you need to take a statin because that is going to kill you, that cholesterol. So what's the real truth of this?
So the real truth of this, it's individual. Okay, it's very individual. It depends on if you have metabolic syndrome, the dyslipidemia, the high cholesterol of the average American or average Canadian. That is different than somebody who is on a low carb diet or is using intermittent fasting to reverse those problems of metabolic syndrome, fatty liver, and obesity. The high cholesterol of somebody who is lean and on these dietary patterns is completely different. They are not the same thing. And just to give you an example, okay, I have a patient just yesterday, came to my office, 400 pounds and, wants to lose weight and actually already losing weight. down 20 pounds, and her cholesterol is very high, 250. She lost 20 pounds. It came down to 200, her total cholesterol. Okay. That is a different beast. I literally had that same day, somebody who has a 6-pack, 8-pack really, looks like a male model. I mean, it's like a triathlete, and is eating low carb and intermittent fasting, just like that same person before. And instead, he's weight maintaining and his cholesterol is going up, right? His cholesterol is going up and his food intake didn't change. So we've seen case after case of these very high cholesterol in these lean patients. And if you go to the medical literature, this is the thing that doctors don't do. It's right there. If you look at, and not to compare this to anorexia, but anorexia is the only time in our modern history where we've seen somebody fast and do low carb for a prolonged period of time. And we've actually measured the outcomes from it, right? In our modern society, everybody's always eating. The average American eats 16 hours a day, right? So we don't have the data on people doing low carb and intermittent fasting for a long time. We have some of it in the Ramadan studies, right, on fasting through Ramadan. Mm-hmm. We have some of the studies, but really, if you look at the data from anorexia, do you think they who are not eating saturated fat, they eat no saturated fat, you think their cholesterol is high or low?
I'm guessing it's high.
It's through the roof.
Yeah.
Should you look at that patient with anorexia and say, you need to decrease your saturated fat?
Of course not. Yeah, you can't take it below zero, right?
Right? Yeah, exactly. So the problem is doctors don't know what they're looking at. They are able to see a number and they don't understand the host factors and they don't understand what is driving it.
Okay, let's sorry, I don't know if you had a point you wanted to finish there.
No, that was it. That's the point.
Okay. I want to back up a little bit to what you were saying earlier on in the interview. You were talking about how obviously the pharma and the food industries, they're all benefiting from wrong information essentially. And doctors can benefit too because of repeat client visits and all that sort of stuff. Right. Yeah. Customers, exactly. Sick care, not healthcare. Obviously though, I would say most doctors, I don't think they have any ill intentions. I think they mean to help and do the best that they can for their clients. So where do you think is the breakdown between the seed of the wrong information that's funded by companies that don't necessarily have our best health interests at heart? And where does it transform into, let's call it even mass hypnosis of the medical professionals, where they truly believe that they are presenting the best quality information that they have and the best healthful response?
I'll tell you, it's an insidious cycle, okay? It starts, so you take anybody going into medical school, they slam them with 80 to 120 hours of studying, okay? Then they go into residency and are basically working 100 hours a week, right? Where they just don't know. They're constantly in an environment where you don't know. And then and you have to learn. And you're taught what to do. You're told what to do. You're told what to think. Right. And then you find yourself 7 or 8 years later after college, right? Now you've finished medical school, finished residency. And in my own case, now I'm, gaining 5 to 10 pounds a year throughout this whole process. And you're in a place where now you have to go into the real world to pay off all the loans that you just accumulated. And you go to the real world and the real world says, we're going to give you $100 for each patient that you see. $150 for each patient that you see. You can spend an hour with them or you can spend 7 minutes. That's your choice. Okay. Wow. So what would anybody do? Okay. That's like I'm distilling it down. Nobody comes from the insurance world and actually says, you have to see people in 7 minutes, but that's the common industry practice. So everybody is seeing patients in 7 minutes. I don't know what you'd learn about a patient or how you'd be able to unlearn a medical reversal, right, that you've been doing for your entire life without questioning it, right, in 7 minutes with a patient back to back to back, right? So and then what happens? You have no time for self-learning and you're taught by pharmaceutical reps when you're in practice.
No, what a surprise. Yeah, that's really going to have an effect. Chris and I, we like what Robert Anton Wilson said. He talks about reality tunnels. Reality tunnels are wholesale confirmation bias that is propped up by all of our beliefs. And it can become so deeply ingrained that if we're only processing 7 bits of information consciously per second, but 3 to 20 million unconsciously, it becomes so deeply ingrained that we are looking with our confirmation bias. It's way easier to look to stuff that supports what we believe than to bring in this information that actually can sound crazy when you first hear it. If you're so embedded in the system that fats are bad for you and all of these things. The number of people who told me when I began eating differently, saying, this will kill you. This will kill you. And well, how do you know that? Well, it'll kill you. It's a very, very difficult thing to break. Chris?
Yeah, I want to also bring up this because Mike and I were talking about this interview yesterday, just planning this and thinking about how do we explain the intersection between hypnosis and healthcare and wellness and low carb eating and all this nutritional science. And we came up with the simple explanation that when people are unquestionably, unconsciously believing what they're taught without question, and then they will also vigorously defend that viewpoint without, even in the face of contradictory information, that is essentially hypnosis on an individual level, but it's happening at mass scale. And you just described it perfectly, Tro. When you talked about medical school, you learn X, then you get put into practice and you're doing your residency and you're working your butt off all week long and you're just told what to believe and told what to do. That creates mass hypnosis in the doctor community, which then gets flooded out into the media and the general public, doesn't it?
I think the other part of this is, I think here's the big part of it. Okay. A lot of medicine, believe it or not, is learning from what you see. Okay. Like, I'm just going to give you really quick examples. Okay. The X-ray has been digitized for 20 years. For 20 years, X-rays have been digitized. Okay. Meaning like they're digital. When you go get it in the hospital, it's digital. And for some reason, okay, and I asked this in my training, they still call an initial read of an X-ray a wet read. Okay, they call it a wet read.
Right.
And I remember asking my attending radiologist when I was doing my radiology rotation, why do they call it a wet read? And he was also new. He was just like fresh out of it. He's like, I don't know. And then he asked like somebody else. He's like, oh, because we used to literally be wet from when we would be doing the film. And we would be putting it up and the chemicals would be dripping off. Okay. And that would be a wet read when you put up this X-ray to the light and it would drip down all these chemicals and you're taking a quick initial look at it. So they still call it a wet read 20 years later or 30 years later, despite no wet reads actually, like no physical films are being used to process X-rays. Right. So that is a perfect metaphor for medicine. Mm-hmm. Right? Nobody's questioned anything in 30 years. Okay, they've just done as what they've told because one person said it and the next person said it and the next person said it. And nobody said, wait a second, this doesn't make sense. Right? So that, and you mentioned martial arts, my old martial arts instructor, Kiyoshi Thomas Clifford, he would call them sensei hands. He goes, don't look at my hands. My hands are brittle. My hands are arthritic from, 50, 60 years of martial arts. Okay. I can't make a straight palm. Okay. You have to have a clear vision of what it is you want to do. You have to have a clear vision of a straight palm. Don't copy my arthritic and bent hands, right? My intention is to straighten my palm. That's what he would say, right? But he has like these crooked arthritic hands, right? And don't copy me. Right? Know what my intent is and copy my intent. So the problem in medicine is sensei hands, right? It's sensei hands because the person, and look at it. I mean, look, I have an ultrasound in the room right next door to me. I have a pocket ultrasound that hooks up to my phone. Okay. It costs about $2,000. It's expensive. Okay. I don't know why any medical student right now is using a stethoscope.
I remember hearing you say that in an interview with medical students that here's this thing, it's new technology and it's far superior than the old tool that has been used forever. Why are people still relying on this old tool?
Bingo. Exactly.
It's like having a rosary or something. It's almost like one of the one of the icons of the art. It's a very, very unusual thing. That's why over the years, we talk about the appeal to authority and how you have the advantage, at least, of being a medical doctor. So you have that authority, which will get messages across quickly. But when we would see someone on TV commercial when I was a kid and they're wearing a white jacket and a stethoscope, of course you're going to believe them, even if they're telling you to smoke Camels, because the stethoscope is a symbol of medical authority there.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, so the problem in medicine, and when you talk about mass hypnosis and kind of, it's that one, we haven't processed the fact that there have been so many medical reversals. We like to think this is the pinnacle of, knowledge, but you know what? At every moment in history, right, even 1,000 years ago when they were putting leeches on people, right? Okay, they thought they were at the pinnacle of the medical treatment. And certainly now, believe it or not, we're not far off from there. We're not. You know what we do? Literally, we give drugs, apixaban, rivaroxaban, Xarelto, it's called Eliquis. They're literally made from the tooth of a leech. Okay? So we're not far, these multi-million, so we are not far off from there, but people think that we're infallible now, that we cannot be wrong. And that's the problem. And I think that arrogance is part of it. And I'm not shielded from that either. We want to think everything we've learned is all there is to know, but that's not the case. And there's been time after time after time in the history of medicine that things have been reversed. Mm-hmm. And yet for some reason, we want to just put this into a place where it's decided, it's done. This is it.
Now we've arrived.
The science is settled, right? The science is settled. Meat causes pollution, right? I heard somebody say that, right? That's what they said. The science is settled. Meat causes pollution. Well, meat, cows produce like less than 3% of greenhouse gases. What's the other 97%? Right?
That's why you still drive a Tesla, not a Subaru.
Shut up.
Mike, yeah, there you go.
Well, you need the Tesla and you need the solar panels to set the carbon footprint. But okay, whatever.
Yeah. Hey, so I do want to come back to that point in a moment, though, because we have in our notes here for part of the arc of this discussion, the idea of how people can become their beliefs. It becomes their identity, and that becomes a problem. But before we get there, let's get back to this idea of it is everyone's own responsibility to learn and to act and to change. And we came up with a simple model, a change formula. Really, we change when we take action because we are at threshold, and I'll get you to talk about that, Mike, and when we have the necessary resources. So Mike, I want to get you to just quickly explain threshold for any audience who doesn't know what that means yet. And for Tro, in case you haven't heard us talk about this yet. And then Tro, I want to have you talk about what was it that created the threshold inside of you and what the resource. I mean, we think we know what the resources were. You learned a lot of stuff, but what was it that caused you to get to threshold? But first, Mike, tell us about threshold.
Yeah. One of my mentors said, you're not a therapist, nobody is. But if you pretend to be one well enough, your clients will pretend to get well. And there's a certain degree of truth to that the client has to make all the changes. When we're dealing with something like a phobia or extreme anxiety or panic attacks, whatever, threshold is when the person can congruently say, something has to change. It has to be now, and it has to be me. And if they're missing any one of those components, I'm not able to help them. But if they're at the point that they're taking responsibility and recognizing they are the thing that has to change, and it has to be immediately. We'd see this with smoking cessation clients. Yeah, I got to get off these things. Notice they're not saying, I'm going to get off them. It's, I've got to. So when are you going to do? Oh, next week. I'll be back next week. They're not ready. So threshold is that point where they have climbed to the top of the garden wall, and me as a hypnotist, I just got to give them a little nudge. And the intervention is minimal at this point because they are at that point. Chris?
Yeah. So if we want to take action because we're at threshold and we need the necessary resources, which in a lot of cases is the knowledge. In this case, specifically, I would say there's a lot of knowledge. So I want to have you talk about what got you to threshold and what was, if anything, was there any resource that you needed beyond just reading a bunch of studies, which you did, or experience?
Yeah, I think look, everything you're saying is actually so insightful, and we do this every day in our coaching tactics, right? So we treat coaching like a model of defense, right? We have a behavior we want to to have happen. We have a lifestyle that we want to have happen. And we view the world as an attack against that lifestyle. Okay. All right. We view the world as an attack against that lifestyle. Okay. So what are the defenses in place that you need to layer, right? In a Swiss cheese, it's called the Swiss cheese model of error. I'm sure you guys have heard of it. It's the fact that no one defense can maintain a lifestyle. No one defense can maintain a behavior you'd like to put in. It has to be, and this has been said throughout history, like it takes a village to raise somebody, or, you know what I mean? Like we know this, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to lifestyle change, right? I think that first point, awareness and knowledge, right? When you imagine, like, let's go back to the Matrix, right? Imagine the Matrix and you need Neo to go seek his destiny, right? And you go to him and tell him, 1 minute, hey, look, I need you to, learn how to fly, see the Matrix. By the way, all these government officials are crazy. They're going to come after you. They can transport. Like, it's going to be like, what is wrong with you? Like, I don't, like you can't act without a deep set of knowledge, without seeing and experiencing. Okay. So you have to build awareness and knowledge first as a cornerstone. Why am I hungry? What am I going to do about it? Right. Why am I hungry? Why am I eating? What's leading me to food? Those questions is really 90% of the intervention.
Right.
Right. Why am I eating? Why am I eating? If you can answer that question, okay, you can do something about it. If you can't answer that question, you're hypnotized and you're propagandized and you have no clue, right?
Yeah.
You have no clue. And there's no point in doing any intervention because you don't know what the problem is and how the solution will work. So if I tell a person who has no clue about appetite, hunger, just to do low carb, right, it may work for a bit, but he'll just regress to the mean eventually.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to bring up because we have a program called the Wellness Academy that we offer to our audience, and in that we call it the three sides of the triangle. We have the supporting base of the triangle is the mental game, and building the other two sides of the triangle are your diet and your activity. But the mental game has to be there, and that to us that really means the messages that you're telling yourself, how your internal dialogue works, but also all kinds of things like what anxieties are you dealing with? What are the sources of your food cravings? Are you doing comfort eating to resolve some anxiety? Are you sleeping well? Are you dealing with a lot of stress that's inflating your cortisol levels? That's not the right way to say it, but that's okay.
We'll
you get the idea. Yeah. So is that the kind of stuff you're coaching people through in your practice, helping them work on understanding what's causing them to eat and what is it that eating is doing for you in this specific moment?
Yeah, I think the first thing that we get them to recognize is the appetite matrix. Is really, why are they hungry, right? Why is it 3 hours after eating pizza, okay, you're eating cold pizza and it tastes better? Why is it 4 hours after you eat Chinese food, you're eating, like you tried not to have the lo mein, the egg roll, and then you're eating the cold leftovers and it tastes better than when you had it before? Or maybe it was Thanksgiving dinner and you ate until you're completely full and you're in a coma, and then all of a sudden 4 hours later you're picking leftovers and then the pie comes out and you're eating again, right? Or maybe it's the fact that you're finished dinner and you're sitting in front of TV and you're going for ice cream or nuts or cheese or whatever it is, dark chocolate, right? Why does that happen? So the first part of our program is explaining, why do people get hungry? Why are you hungry? What modulates hunger? Okay, what is happening? Okay, that you are actually going for food. Is it a blood sugar shift, a hormonal shift? Is it my 8-year-old son coined the term hungored? You hungored, right? He's like, Dad, I'm hungry because I'm bored.
Yeah.
My 8-year-old son, he's got so I mean. My 6-year-old daughter, 7-year-old daughter, so she's 6, she's going to be 7, but when she was 4, I'm sitting in the car with her and she's like, Dad, I just can't help it sometimes when I see cookies, I want them. Right? I just can't help myself. She's 4 years old. Okay? I don't restrict their diets much at all, just so you know. But she was describing to me food addiction. By the way, the scientific community doesn't believe that exists. So the first part of it is, what is the experience you're having? Why are you hungry? What's modulating your appetite? Why are you eating? What is bringing you to food? Right? And then the second part of it is like, okay, now we know why you're hungry. Now we know why you're eating. Well, what can you do about it? Here's what high carb food will do. Here's what carb and fat combinations will do. Here is what fat and protein combinations will do. Here's what added fat will do to your appetite. Right? And here's where it'll leave you. And this is how it may affect your appetite. Right? So we have to educate first so they understand, right? Like, you have to see the matrix before you can break free. Sense. You know, if you don't understand what's going on, you're not going to be able to break free. Then it's like, okay, now you know that you know the problem, you know, or at least are aware of the problem, or you're aware that you don't know the full extent of the problem. Well, what can you do about it? Right? So, and, you know, pizza is one of those foods that people can't restrict. I haven't met a person yet that said, if I find them right before they walk into the pizza shop and make them eat a pound of meat, will they still eat pizza?
I totally agree with you. And through, of course, years of listening to your podcast and other expert podcasts of people that you've interviewed, I completely agree. I mean, if you eat, how many hard-boiled eggs do you think you'll need to eat before you're totally full? How many ounces of salmon before there's no way that you could eat that piece of pizza? But if you have 4 slices of that extra large pizza, you're going to be back in an hour for the rest. And it's absolutely nutty. And actually, this is a good segue, Tro, into the idea of what is conscious and versus what is unconscious. What should people be doing to intervene consciously versus what should simply be done unconsciously? And Mike and I have taught a model that I think it'll resonate with you. Calorie counting to us is ludicrous. It's something that the concept only got invented about 100 years ago or so. The scientific concept of a calorie as a way to measure energy. So if people 100 plus years ago didn't understand what a calorie even was, therefore couldn't get around to the idea that they should count them, now that we understand this scientific concept as a way to measure energy, why is it that that's the only thing that we should consciously track? We don't measure how many liters of water we drink before we go to the bathroom.
Yeah, how many molecules of oxygen have I breathed today?
How long have I been underwater when I'm swimming so that I know, I should probably come up and breathe now because my oxygen level is depleting. None of these things are consciously controlled. I don't go outside for a run in the summer with a sweatshirt on and measure my body temperature and go, I'm elevating my body temperature. I should probably take the sweatshirt off, right? It's all unconscious. All of those things are controlled unconsciously, which leads us to the idea that maybe calories should also be an unconscious result. And it's the result of the food choice, the input.
Satiety
instead. The conscious control should be on what types of food you eat, the input. The output of that should be how much you ate. Does that make sense? Is that something you agree with?
Calories needs to die.
Yeah.
Calories needs to die. And people need to track hunger and satiety and appetite and cravings. And why am I eating? If you want to track something, why am I eating?
Mm-hmm.
Track that. What is the best I can do about it?
And what led to it, right? Like what food choices or life things that are happening to you in your life that might have led to it. And that'll result in you making better choices about the kinds of food that you put in your mouth.
Bingo. Why am I hungry?
One of the things here that you just mentioned, Chris, that really resonated with me when I was starting to get control of my eating was I began to notice when I was hungry for the first time instead of just eating. And the idea of Jason Fung talking about ghrelin waves. And when I started framing it and saying, this is just a hormone release. Nothing will happen if I don't eat. This will disappear in 40 minutes anyway. And then just riding that wave and acknowledging it instead of it sending me to the cupboard to stuff my face with dried fruit or something.
Yeah, the idea of reframing. So we were talking about reframing. And for those who are listening to the podcast, haven't heard that term before, reframing just means changing the frame with which you look at something. So a ghrelin wave could mean, I'm starving, I better eat. And you could reframe it to, it's just a short-term signal. And we have a couple of others too, like when it comes to dietary interventions, sometimes people think like, never again. I should never, ever eat pizza again. Pressure cooker, you're probably going to fail. Reframe that into, I rarely or I occasionally eat X, whatever the food is that you're looking to restrict. And also the idea of reframing, what's the term we're looking for? Food restriction, like, I can't eat X. These basket of foods, I can't eat those. Instead, reframe it to, what do you get to eat instead? I get to eat juicy ribeye steaks. many times a week. And I love that, right? So those are just some nice reframes. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, our first thing is when we're we don't deal with restricting. We don't deal with it at all.
That's
and we
awesome.
say, in fact, if you want to replace what you can't restrict, and I have to be careful what I say here, because my I'm just going to say a disclosure. My wife owns a company and runs a company that deals with low carb cakes and cookies, and they make low carb and low sugar replacements. But we take anything somebody could want and we replace it with a low carb version. And usually in the beginning, I tell them, I don't even care if you eat them. Look, if you want to be good and you want to diet, don't eat them. But when you're ready to, like when your boss is yelling at you, your wife's yelling at you, your kids are yelling at you, you're in money trouble, somebody died and you have health problems, okay, and you're looking to eat chocolate ice cream, you better eat the low carb chocolate ice cream. You better have that in place.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of, using heroin, you use methadone.
Yeah,
Okay?
it's the lesser evil. It's not something you want to be using every day or even every week necessarily, but it's there for you to get you through a tough time.
Bingo. Okay, so we live in a world with Haagen-Dazs and M&Ms, okay, and French fries everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's the reality of our world. And to deal with this reality of our world and the stress-induced increased hunger, right, we don't restrict anything, we replace everything.
Mm-hmm.
And replace it. And then we tell people, put it in the freezer and never use it. Get the low carb chocolate and then never need it, right? Get the low carb ice cream and then never let it rot in the freezer. Eat meat, fish, chicken, eggs, Greek yogurt until you're full, right? So I think the first step is just replace what you can't restrict.
Yeah.
So we have to deal with that component. And then, it's like, you're not going to lose that. I haven't met somebody yet who was like, wow, that low carb pizza wasn't delicious, right? So if you really cared about losing your pizza, we'll replace it.
Yeah.
Those people after a month or 2 months don't give a crap.
Yeah.
They don't care about it. They're eating steaks and fish and chicken. They're happy because they're not hungry and they don't want to go back to craving food. So once they get over that hump, so we give them what they can't replace, like we replace what they can't restrict. And then after 2 months, they don't even care. They don't even care about those things. Right? I think maybe it's a reverse psychology. Like, you want pizza? Here's your pizza. You want bagels? Here's your bagels. You want ice cream? Here's your ice cream. And then they're like,
yeah, when you take away the messaging of never again, you take them out of the pressure cooker, right? So that just makes so much sense. Hey, we're into the last 10 minutes of what we've got booked in your calendar. We want to be respectful of your time. If you're willing to go a little bit over, we can too. That's fine. But I wanted to rapid fire through a few more points. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So first of all, we already started on this path. So let's continue. When you're taking people through a process, I know that you've described what you do for the first few months. And there's a bit of a baby step approach. So you don't just throw them into, hey, I want you to cut out all the carbs. I want you to intermittent fast, et cetera, et cetera. I want you to exercise. What do you do? What are the steps in the order? Just a quick explanation of what you take people through in terms of the process.
Yeah, it's super easy. Okay. Replace what you can't restrict. Mm-hmm. Eat meat, fish, chicken, eggs, Greek yogurt, green leafy vegetables, low carb fruit until you're full. Track why you're hungry, why you're eating, what's sating you, what's making you more hungry. Track that for the first 2 months so you understand your hunger. And then when you finally get not hungry, by keeping your carbs less than 30 grams per day total, okay, when you finally get not hungry, then stop eating when you're not hungry. And that's called intermittent fasting.
Perfect.
That's it. And then once you're not hungry and you're eating infrequently, most people come into my office eating, 4 to 7 meals a day. They leave my office eating 1 to 2 meals, call it 1.5 meal a day, and they're not hungry.
Perfect.
Okay, and that process, the initial process of decreasing your hunger takes about 4 to 6 weeks. We don't tell people to lose weight in the first 4 to 6 weeks because it's pointless. They're going to be more hungry. They're figuring stuff out. They're trying to make a lifestyle change, so don't even worry about it. And then when you're not hungry, you start intermittent fasting, and that promotes the things that'll keep you not hungry. Okay, the biochemically, it'll promote some of the things that are keeping you not hungry, having ketones, having a stable blood sugar, etc. And then when you're finally at a weight that feels more comfortable in your body, then add exercise. right? And usually that's like month 3 or 4, depending on how much weight somebody has to lose, and start gently. And very frequently, that's all people have to do. That's it.
This is a great reminder for everyone listening that diet, what you put in your mouth, and understanding satiety and hunger is much more important in the weight loss equation than exercise is. Even though you're adding in exercise, Tro, right? You're telling them to get in exercise, although if they choose not to or whatever, it's not the end of the world. But absolutely, we're promoting the idea of exercise and even resistance training to build even more insulin sensitivity and things like that. Now, we probably won't have time to dive into the science on that, but exercise is fantastic, but it's not the main thing to do if you want to lose weight. Isn't that true?
Yeah, look, absolutely. A lot of times, what's the downside of exercise? Okay, the downside of exercise is injury. If you were like me, 350 pounds, and so injury is a big thing, right? And pain, literally pain. So that's a downside. And increase in appetite is another downside, right? Okay, so if you have increase in appetite and pain and discomfort and injury as a risk to a weight loss measure, well, what's the benefit? There's a general benefit of activity, right? Which you don't really need to exercise to get. So it's particularly in the beginning when somebody's still figuring out appetite and at a very large mass, I don't see a big benefit. They're at highest risk of having an increased appetite and overeating because they don't understand their hunger. So it's not, I don't view it as beneficial at all for the first 2 months. In fact, I didn't do it for the first year. The second year I started walking on a treadmill with binge watching Netflix. Right. So I lost 80 pounds and not doing any exercise.
That's awesome. This is really, I think this is going to help reframe people's beliefs in a big way, those who are listening.
But then that brings the point. What's it going to take in your estimation, Tro, for this to become mainstream? There is a movement in this direction. We're hearing more and more people,
the power
I've
of the internet.
Keto. I've started intermittent fasting. I'm doing OMAD, whatever. The power of the internet. It's gaining momentum. But
I'm thinking, so not only the power of the internet, but also the power of wearable devices, constant glucose monitors, and basically artificial intelligence and all these other things that can come into play. Apple Health, we were talking offline a bit. Yeah, what's it going to take so that the world understands this and we can dehypnotize everybody?
Or is it just
from all
time?
The crap that they have been believing?
There's powerful forces against this. I mean, Weight Watchers and the whole health industry, Jenny Craig, Gatorade, Nestle, M&M, Unilever, McDonald's, all these places, right? They make a benefit from having you be happy with their food and be more hungry, right? So you're fighting a model that is going to be very challenging. I think, we have to support our doctors, right? Our private doctors. And that's why we're helping Brian Linskis, Andy Fung, Philip Ovadia get set up so they have the time to build that awareness defense. And then we need to work on that preparation defense. And that's, really something that my wife has done. Like, look, you need a pizza dough. We'll get you a pizza dough that's low carb. The industry has to do that. Mm-hmm. I mean, right now we give people recipes. They can buy almond flour and make anything that they need essentially on their own. We give them, we'll use protein shakes, or we'll teach them how to make ice cream that's low carb. So if they need that, so to really prepare that preparation defense, right? And then another thing that I think is really needed is the evidence, right? What is it going to take for you to be a believer, right? What is it going to take? And that's where kind of the doctors come in and as a community and support, right? CGM should be in every patient's hand. Access to frequent blood cholesterol checks should be in their hands so they can actively disprove what the current hypnotic message is, right? Mm-hmm. So when I get people in my office, I'm like, look, I don't want you to believe me. I want you to question me because I want you to question them too. I want you to question everybody. And what I'll do that they won't do is I'll give you a blood glucose meter that will check your blood glucose 24 hours a day. And you'll see what the oatmeal and toast and the, whole grain bananas did to you. Okay. And not only that, but I'll let you check your cholesterol. I have a finger stick meter here where you can check your cholesterol in less than 5 minutes, and you can check it as frequently as you need. Okay. So that as your health improves, you can verify what's actually going on underneath the hood. So I will give you the tools to tell you who lied to you. Okay.
Now there's the thing.
That is a great
That's
line.
the thing. Who lied to you? And as you pointed out a minute ago, the forces against us eating like this and being aware of this are extremely high. I'll give you a quick example. My niece is a naturopathic doctor and very smart young woman. She watched the film Super Size Me. And she said it was the weirdest thing. She said as soon as the film was over, she could not resist rushing to McDonald's. She said all it did was fire off all the ads she'd ever seen, and she couldn't wait to get a freaking Big Mac and fries. And she doesn't even normally eat that stuff.
Well, that goes to show you that a lot of the time, emotion will overpower logic, right?
Yeah, maybe all the time.
Well, conditioning, I think that's part of it, right? So I think
neural
they
pathways
play on the fact that, and conditioning is innate, right? It's appropriate, right? If we were like bears in the woods and we knew where the salmon was and the berries were and the beehive with the honey was, we'd want to remember that, and we'd want to remember that area so we could always go back to that area and find it. So conditioning as a programming for intake is a true and fine process that has an evolutionary purpose. Now the food companies have definitely taken advantage of this. If you just see McDonald's, you probably get hungry, right? So if you're just aware of that, right, that's the first step, right? Like, hey, look,